Opening title appears. Universal Design in Higher Education. Title swipes across the screen, followed by Roger O. Smith, followed by Tim O'Connor, followed by UW La Crosse. Title fades to black. Universal Design in the Classroom, Part 3, Tim O'Connor. Video fades to black. Tim O'Connor in a classroom in front of a group of faculty members.
Psychiatric panic attack. We have a number of students we have to put down. You know, we're very cautious. We don't put down too much, but we do put down a student might have to leave the room, you know, in a hurry, and that could be a health or whatever. But
yes,
but that would be really, if you close this little tiny room off for people with panic attacks.
Yeah,
I was going to say also some of the seating. You know, the chairs. I'm a lefty. Well, this is kind of designed for a right-handed person. I have to kind of, if I needed to write, I'd be writing like this. But it's also nice to be able to see that there are at least a variety of different types of chairs for individuals that have maybe different orthopedic needs. Like this chair might not be a very good one, but maybe one of the blue ones is a little higher up. Or even the fact that that desk there has a higher chair with a cushion. Or individuals that maybe, let's say, broke their ankle, they need to be able to elevate their leg for when they have to sit. In a situation like this, they're able to maneuver the chairs and things like that. If they're all bolted down to the floor, well, then there's going to
that's a really poor setup to have them bolted down.
Yeah, but that's something that is sometimes the newer types of rooms can have more limitations than some of these older.
Exactly. One of the things that that we're doing in Madison is we're renovating the education building, the old education building, and we're looking at classrooms from a different viewpoint. We're bringing in students with disabilities. We're bringing in instructors to look over a classroom and say, well, you know, this is important. These things are important from both sides, both points of view. As an instructor, what kinds of things are important to have there? And as a student with disabilities, what kinds of accessibility issues are important to them? So that we develop these classrooms. Now, granted, it's just a few classrooms because it's just a small renovation. But it's important, you know, it's kind of setting a precedent. This is what we want to move towards in the future. We want to move towards making classrooms accessible. Some of the newer ones are some of the most inaccessible things I've ever seen. I was at a conference a few weeks ago, and this is at the Pyle Center. These supposedly really nicely new, renovated, and I could barely get into this chair. They swiveled out, and I have a little bit of a belly, so it was kind of very uncomfortable for me. And I can't imagine anyone who was really big ever being comfortable in there. If you had any kind of a mobility issue, you're going to have a very difficult time sitting in those chairs and being comfortable. And yet it's considered modern. You know, very new, very newly renovated. But it's obvious they didn't look at things. So one thing I'm going to say is, you know, be vocal. When you have the opportunity, speak up.
Well,
Don't be afraid to.
I have students that come into our office, which they really shouldn't have to come to our office because they're too heavy to get into the chair. So we have to call physical plant. That's not something we need to deal with. I mean, a professor could call physical plant, you know, but that's embarrassing if you can't get in the seat. And,
That's right.
you know.
It is very. One last thing I want to mention, and I talked about this during the testing, and this is something that you need to really, it's important to consider as an instructor, is the different learning styles of students. And this goes way beyond disabilities. This goes into the way students learn. You know, students, there's auditory, there's visual, and then there's what we call kinesthetic tactile. Usually the most productive method of learning for almost 100% of students is the kinesthetic tactile. And that doesn't, when we talk about that, it's often think, well, manipulatives and doing things with your hands. No, it's when you can do it in your own classrooms. You put a student in a position where they're playing a role, where they're actually doing something like they're generalizing. You know, intelligence is a generalizable thing. So you put them in a place where they're kind of like they're in the spot of whether it's role playing or making decisions or doing the things you want to do, thinking about things certain ways. It's putting them in that position. That is the most effective learning strategy there is. But it's important to keep in mind that probably half of your students are going to be auditory learners and generally, and half are going to be visual learners. And so if you just lecture, it's going to be very difficult for those visual learners. So maybe putting information out ahead of time or giving it to them visually as well, it will be very, very helpful to those students. And the same thing, if you use a lot of visual stuff, don't forget the auditory students, the ones who do learn very well by listening. You know, you can put all the great visuals and all these graphs and stuff, but some students, and it has nothing to do with intelligence, it has to do with their mode of learning, the best way for them to learn. So provide that information to them verbally as well. And another important thing is research shows overwhelmingly that if you use both modalities, everybody learns better. So if you combine your teaching techniques using both verbal and visual, you'll be more effective as a teacher. Any questions? Any other comments about the room?
Repeating what you say, if you're into some of these large lecture halls, repeating questions, that's so important.
Yes, it is.
Because you can't hear the question, and then you're sitting back there listening to the answer that you didn't hear the question for. So I think repeating and using both written and verbal when you give instructions, especially for a test. You know, everyone writes their instructions for the test down and you pass out the test to students. Well, read it to them too. That way there won't be anywhere near as much confusion by some students if you read it too. So they're looking at it and you're reading it, they're hearing it. You know, everyone's happier and you'll get better outcome from your students. It might be slight, but even slight outcome is better than none.
Video fades to black. Closing. R2D2 logo appears. Title reads, copy and distribute freely, but use in its entirety and do not alter. Access said project, copyright 2009, Rehabilitation, Research, Design, and Disability R2D2 Center. Please visit us at access-ed.r2d2.uwm.edu. The Access Ed project is supported in part by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Post-Secondary Education, PR Award P33A050090. The Access Ed documents contained in this video are those of the grantee and do not necessarily reflect directly on the U.S. Department of Education.